They vanished, an entire family. A mother, father, their two tiny sons, and a grandmother who had just come to visit. No goodbyes, no ransom, just silence. But behind that silence, a businessman turned drug trafficker with a new plan. Erase the owners, steal the company, and pretend nothing ever happened. This is the untold story of how the Chohan family was hunted, manipulated, and murdered. Not by a stranger in the shadows, but by a man in a suit, smiling over dinner, plotting every move. Stay with us because what happened next will stay with you forever. The camera shakes gently. Laughter bounces off the living room walls. A toddler stumbles into his mother's arms. His baby brother coos in the background. It's ordinary, warm, and real. It was a quiet afternoon in Hounslow, London. Anil Chohan, proud father and businessman, recorded his family's small joys. The baby's smile, his mother-in-law's laugh, his wife Nancy's teasing remarks. He pans the camera to their kitchen, the bright colors of the boys' toys, the sleepy faces of a household wrapped in love. What he didn't know was that he was capturing their last happy moments. In less than 48 hours, they would all vanish. On February 16, 2003, a journalist in New Zealand named Onkar Verma grew worried. His calls to his sister Nancy weren't going through. Then he tried their mother. Still nothing. In London, the Chohan house sat eerily still. Toys were left out. Uneaten food rotted in the fridge. 2 children's bottles stood filled on the counter. No bags were packed, no signs of forced entry. No one had left in a rush, but no one remained either. Anil Chohan was a respected businessman. He owned Saiba Freight, a thriving fruit import company near Heathrow. Employees called him a family man, humble, generous, with a habit of ordering pizzas during long shifts. He'd made mistakes in the past, a stint in prison for tax offenses, but rebuilt his life from scratch. He had everything that mattered: a good business, 2 beautiful boys, and a loving wife. And he believed people deserved second chances. Maybe that's why he let a man like Kenneth Regan walk through his door. Kenneth Regan came asking for work. He said he'd just gotten out of prison. He needed a chance. Anil looked at the man, white, early 50s, confident but plain-spoken. He nodded. "You're hired." What Anil didn't know was that Regan had once been a millionaire drug smuggler with a violent past. His nickname in the underworld was Captain Cash. He had run fake freight companies near Heathrow to smuggle heroin, but he got caught. And to save himself, he snitched on 12 top criminals. Now, out of prison, Regan had lost everything. He wanted it all back, and he had found the perfect target. Regan didn't just want a job, he wanted to take over. Within weeks of starting, he approached Anil with an offer. £3 million from private investors who wanted to buy Saiba Freight. Nancy was intrigued. She missed India. She wanted to return home. Regan played the part well. He worked hard, drove routes, smiled at staff. All the while, he was laying the groundwork. His real plan wasn't to buy the business. It was to eliminate its owner. While he was scheming at work, Regan had another target, Belinda Bruin. A single mother in Devon, she was once a London socialite. Regan had been obsessed with her for years. She hadn't answered his letters in prison. But now, he dangled a lifeline. He offered her a job, managing director of Saiba Freight. A cushy salary, barely 2 days of work a week. She was drowning in debt. 2 kids in private school, mortgage overdue. She said yes. Soon after, strange things began happening on Belinda's property. 2 men, Regan's associates, arrived with a digger. They said they were building her a drainage ditch. She hadn't asked for one. Regan brushed it off. Said he wanted to improve her land. He promised walls, gates, clean gravel paths. But the trench they dug wasn't for water. It was for something far darker. Thursday morning, February 13th. Anil told staff he had a business meeting. "I'll be back soon," he said. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. By Monday, the company had a new owner. Kenneth Regan introduced Belinda to the team. He said Anil had retired abroad with his wife and children. The staff was stunned, confused. The office felt cold. Regan handed over a typed letter signed by Anil, but the signature was forged. Belinda tried to settle in. Regan had given her a desk and books to review. But something gnawed at her. Why hadn't she spoken to Anil? Why had he disappeared without even a goodbye? That night, she left work early and drove back to Devon. When she arrived home, the ditch on her property was deeper, wider. She was furious. Regan told her he thought she'd appreciate the gesture. She didn't. But she had no idea it might hold the truth about 5 missing lives. 12,000 miles away in New Zealand, Onkar Verma couldn't sleep. His sister Nancy never missed a call. But now, days had passed with silence. He called again. No answer. He tried their mother. Still nothing. Worried, he contacted the London police. At first, the case seemed routine, just a family that might have left town. But when police visited the Chohan home, they found untouched food, baby toys, and unopened suitcases. Nothing had been packed. No passports missing. It wasn't a relocation. It was something else. Onkar Verma stepped off the plane at Heathrow with a sick feeling in his gut. He hadn't been to the UK in nearly a decade. He was supposed to visit his sister Nancy under better circumstances, for laughter, family dinners, maybe even to meet his nephews for the first time. Instead, he walked into a house filled with silence. Nothing had changed inside. Devinder's little toy car sat untouched on the floor. Ravinder's formula bottles were lined up on the counter as if awaiting bedtime. His mother's prayer book, something she never left behind, rested quietly by her bedside. The fridge was full. The beds were made, but the people were gone. Onkar marched to the police with what he had: photos, call logs, memories, and a gut instinct that screamed something was terribly wrong. "I know my sister," he said. "She wouldn't just leave." Detectives hesitated. People vanish every day, but something in Onkar's eyes made them pause. That night, they opened a formal investigation. Detectives began with the obvious question: who was the last person to see Anil Chohan alive? The answer was Kenneth Regan. Regan gave them a story. Anil was in financial trouble. He had sold his company and run off to escape debts. He'd retired quietly with his family to India. The officers took notes. They smiled. They said thank you, but they didn't believe a word of it. Mobile data told a different story. Using advanced forensic mapping, investigators traced the path of Anil's phone. It had last pinged near Stonehenge, just as Regan said, but then it traveled south, toward Devon. Strangely, Regan's phone was following the same route, down the motorway past Salisbury all the way to Exeter. 2 phones, 1 trail. There was only one known link between Regan and Devon: Belinda Bruin. Detectives decided to pay her a visit. When Regan found out, he panicked. He called Belinda, telling her to cancel the meeting. "Don't let them in," he said. "Meet them somewhere neutral. They'll only make things worse." But Belinda didn't listen. Just before police could question Belinda, they received a tip. Regan's associate, William Hornsey, had called in. He claimed he had spoken to Anil Chohan, that Anil was still alive, that he was hiding in Wales under a fake name. Hornsey said he could help the police find him if they met at a statue near the Newport passport office. Police arrived at the location. Hornsey and Regan stood there, glancing nervously at their phones. They acted surprised, said the meeting had been canceled last minute, said Anil was on the run, said someone must have warned him. But detectives weren't fooled. The call that canceled the meeting? It came from an unregistered phone, a phone they traced back to Regan himself. As detectives circled closer, Belinda remembered something odd, something Regan told her before the police were due to visit. "If they ask what I was doing on your land," he said, "just tell them I was working on your water system." But Regan hadn't touched the water. He had dug a trench. The moment Belinda said the words drainage ditch, the detective paused. Then he called a team in. They were going to Devon. Police cordoned off Belinda's field. Forensic archaeologists began to dig, layer by layer, shovel by shovel. By day 2, they had found burnt fabric, strands of hair, and pieces of children's clothing fasteners, the kind used on baby grow suits. Then, Kim jewelry, a small gold chain, Charanjit's wedding bangles, no bodies. But the earth spoke loudly. While police searched the land, a fisherman in Bournemouth spotted something floating offshore. It was a body, bloated, face down. The head was wrapped in plastic. Packing tape was wound tightly across the mouth. It was Anil Chohan. Anil had been beaten, a blow to the back of the head, likely with a blunt object. He had then been suffocated. Packing tape left bruises across his face. He died in fear, in silence. His socks were still on when they found him, and inside one of them was a letter. The letter was dated February 12, 2003. It was addressed to Kenneth Regan. Chohan had hidden it in his sock. One final act of resistance, one last cry for help. From beyond the grave, he had identified his killer. The body proved what police had feared. But where were the others? Nancy, the two babies, Charanjit, they couldn't have simply vanished. The size of the grave suggested more had been buried there, then moved. All hopes of a runaway family were gone. While police worked the field, Belinda ran into Regan and Hornsey again. They were parked nearby, watching. He asked her to go for coffee. She lied, said she had to return something. Then she drove away and called Detective Rowe. Whatever you do, he told her, don't get in that car. By the time police arrived, Regan and Hornsey were gone. Regan and Hornsey fled to Europe, but one man stayed behind. Peter Reese, alone, paranoid, and burdened by guilt. He checked into a boarding house in England. Within days, he confessed everything, to a stranger. He told the landlady about the murders, about the children, about the field. He broke down in tears. I didn't kill anyone, he insisted. But he knew too much. Reese was arrested at a nearby pub. Then came the others. Regan was captured in Belgium after 2 months on the run. Hornsey turned himself in 6 weeks later. All three were charged, but they said nothing. No emotion, no explanations, only silence. Police had recovered Anil, but where were Nancy, Charanjit, and the boys? Weeks passed, then one more body surfaced, Nancy. She had floated ashore near the Isle of Wight. Still dressed, still bound, her brother Onkar flew to identify her. He held her hand one last time, said goodbye. I tried, he whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. With the suspects in custody and 2 bodies recovered, police knew they had a rare and horrifying case on their hands. The calculated elimination of an entire family, 2 adults, 2 infants, and a grandmother, by a man seeking power, money, and control. But arrests weren't enough. To convict Regan, Hornsey, and Reese, the prosecution needed one thing: irrefutable evidence. Not suspicion, not theory, proof. And that would take months. In April 2005, the trial began at London's Old Bailey. It would become one of the longest in the court's history, lasting 9 months. 3 men sat in the dock. 3,000 miles away, Onkar watched the updates quietly from New Zealand, clinging to justice like a thread. In the courtroom, the stakes were enormous. No one had ever attempted to erase an entire family to steal a business. It sounded like fiction, but every gruesome detail was real. The prosecution started with what they knew. Anil Chohan disappeared on February 13, 2003. That day, phone records showed his device traveled from London to Stonehenge, then to Wilton, then to Devon. But he didn't go alone. Regan's, Hornsey's, and Reese's phones mirrored the same path. 3 criminals, 1 businessman. By nightfall, only the criminals were seen again. At the heart of it all was one location, 3 Forge Close. Regan's home, a small bungalow in Wilton, quiet and unassuming. But for 5 days after Anil vanished, phone records placed all 3 suspects there, at all hours, never alone, never apart. Detectives believed Anil was held there, forced to sign documents, possibly tortured, then murdered. Then came a breakthrough delivered by a family member. Hornsey's own son approached detectives. He handed over 2 items, a gray suitcase and a Lexmark color printer. Inside the suitcase were sheets of forged documents, company papers, false letters, and 10 pages bearing Anil Chohan's signature. Police believed the real Anil was made to sign them under duress. And if he resisted, Regan had backups. With those signatures, Regan forged a fake story. He told employees Anil had left to care for his health. He told Belinda he was taking over operations. He told police that Anil had gone to India. Every lie had a document to back it up. It wasn't just murder, it was corporate identity theft. A man had been erased and replaced. But one question haunted the court. Why kill everyone? Why not just Anil? Detectives had the answer. Because Nancy would have talked. Because Charanjit was always with the kids. Because Devinder might remember Regan's face one day. It was about control. Silence. No witnesses. No loose ends. The prosecution returned to Belinda's farm. There they presented forensic findings. Burnt women's jewelry, tiny fasteners from infant clothing, human hair, later confirmed as Anil's. They believed the entire family had been buried there, then exhumed and dumped in the ocean once Regan suspected police interest. A grave turned into a decoy. The jury also heard about the landlady, Wendy Powles, who said Peter Reese confessed everything while renting a room. He said, "They can't pin anything on me. I didn't pull the trigger." But he knew too much. He talked about the babies, how Regan shot them, called him a psycho, said he'd buried them all. Then, in court, he refused to speak. And finally, the most haunting piece of evidence, the one no one saw coming. The note, hidden inside Anil's sock, damaged by seawater, folded tightly. A letter from a building society addressed to Kenneth Regan, dated the day Anil vanished. The jury held their breath as the scientist read it aloud. It was the smoking gun from beyond the grave. It took the jury just one day to decide. Peter Reese was convicted of Anil's murder, 23 years to life. Kenneth Regan and William Hornsey were each convicted of 5 counts of murder for Anil, Nancy, Charanjit, and the 2 boys. They were sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. They will never leave prison. Charanjit's remains were eventually found near the Isle of Wight. But Devinder and baby Ravinder were never recovered. 2 tiny lives erased without a trace. Even in victory, the pain remained. Onkar returned to New Zealand, a changed man. He never got to meet his nephews, never heard them laugh or cry or say his name. But he kept one thing, an old family video. It was filmed just 2 days before the murders. In it, Nancy is laughing. Devinder is learning to walk. Ravinder is nestled in her arms. Charanjit claps her hands from the sofa. Joy in a clip. He watches it often. Anil Chohan made one fatal mistake. He believed in second chances. Kenneth Regan wasn't just a criminal. He was a manipulator, a planner, a man who thought he could kill, steal, lie, and walk away untouched. But even he couldn't silence a family forever. Not when a brother refused to stop asking questions. Not when a sock carried the truth. Not when justice, no matter how long it takes, comes knocking anyway. The courtroom had gone quiet. The killers had been sentenced. Reporters packed up their notebooks. Headlines faded into other tragedies. But for Onkar Verma, one question remained. One wound that never closed. Where were the babies? Devinder had just learned to walk. Ravinder was only 8 weeks old. 2 innocent children, 2 vanished souls. No bodies, no graves, no chance to say goodbye. Back in Devon, the trench in Belinda Bruin's field was filled in. But the land never forgot. Grass grew over the place where murder once slept. The ditch, once a secret grave, now held memories in its roots. Belinda never farmed that part again. Not out of superstition, but out of respect. Kenneth Regan remains in prison. He never confessed, never apologized, never showed remorse. He lives in a world of concrete steel and locked doors. To the other inmates, he's a footnote. To the Chohan family, he's a shadow they can't forget. Belinda Bruin wasn't involved in the crimes, but she had unknowingly played a part. The forged documents, she'd carried them. The company handover, she'd introduced it. The ditch, it was dug right under her watch. For years, she wrestled with shame. But the truth was simple. Regan had fooled everyone, including her. Seba Freight no longer exists. The warehouse is gone. The sign torn down. The trucks have rusted, sold, or scrapped. Workers scattered to new jobs. The brand once tied to fruit and commerce is now tied to murder and loss. It wasn't just a company that Regan stole. It was a man's legacy. Among the few things recovered from the Chohan home was Charanjit's prayer book. It sits now in Onkar's home in New Zealand, kept in a velvet pouch, untouched but deeply felt. He opens it once a year, on the date of their disappearance. He reads it not for answers, but for connection. Onkar never fully moved on, but he built a new chapter. He now volunteers with families of missing persons, helps those who wait, those who wonder. He tells them this: never stop asking, never stop knocking. Truth hides, but it never disappears. On his quiet evenings, Onkar plays the video again. Nancy laughing, Anil calling out, Devinder toddling toward the camera, Charanjit clapping, the baby, little Ravinder, cooing softly. That 2-minute video has become a time machine, a heartbeat preserved in film. Regan tried to erase them, with forged letters, with lies, with a shovel and a boat, but they didn't vanish. They exist in a brother's voice, in a video's laughter, in the way truth refused to stay buried. This story ends in loss, but it also ends in light. Some stories refuse to stay silent. They echo through courtrooms, through salt-stained socks, through the empty spaces a family once filled. This isn't just about crime, it's about legacy. It's about how even in death, the truth finds a way to speak. Anil Chohan was more than a businessman. Nancy was more than a wife. Charanjit more than a mother. And those two little boys were more than victims. They were loved, they were the future, and they will never be forgotten. So if you're watching this and carrying grief too heavy to hold, remember this. Justice does not always come quickly, but it does come, and sometimes it arrives wrapped in paper, tucked inside a sock, waiting for someone to find it. We tell these stories not just to remember the dead, but to remind the living that truth has power. Even when buried, Kenneth Regan wore many faces. To some, he was a helpful driver. To others, a successful businessman. To Belinda, a charming, if slightly unhinged man with ambition. But to detectives, he became something else entirely. A manipulator, a liar, and a killer without conscience. As police combed through Regan's past, a disturbing pattern emerged. He didn't just commit crimes, he curated them. Before the murders, Regan lived large. He earned the nickname Captain Cash for his habit of carrying around briefcases stuffed with high-denomination notes. He flashed gold watches, drank expensive wine, and rubbed shoulders with smugglers and socialites. But it wasn't real wealth. It was drug money. Smuggled heroin, fake freight companies used to move narcotics through customs. When he was caught, he flipped, betraying 12 major underworld figures to reduce his sentence. When he was released, they had nothing to say to him, and neither did the streets he once ruled. Regan's true addiction wasn't drugs, it was dominance. He wasn't just interested in buying Seba freight. He wanted to become Anil Chohan, take his business, his house, his reputation. It's why he forged the signatures, why he replaced him so quickly, why he even impersonated him over the phone to suppliers. Regan didn't just want to disappear Anil, he wanted to be him. The trial gave the world answers, but not all. Devinder and Ravinder were never found, not in the ocean, not in the fields, not even among the ashes from the burn pile. Detectives have theories. Some believe they were buried in a second location. Others think Regan destroyed their remains beyond recognition. One grim possibility haunts investigators to this day, that the bodies were never meant to be found. When the verdict came in, the headlines exploded. Drug smuggler killed entire family for freight company. Captain Cash gets life for murdering 2 babies. Unthinkable crime ends in historic sentence. For days, the UK watched in horror. Radio hosts questioned how something like this could happen. TV panels dissected Regan's background, and people whispered in shops, "Did you hear about the Chohan family?" Before the Chohan case, most missing persons investigations were delayed. Maybe they just left town, police often said. Maybe it's a family dispute. But this case changed that. It proved that families could be erased, quietly, suddenly, and completely. Afterward, police departments across the UK updated missing persons protocols, especially when entire households vanish. Now, one unanswered call from a loved one triggers action. Because of Nancy, because of Charanjit, because of 2 tiny boys no one came looking for on time. There were many people involved in solving this case. Detectives, forensics, prosecutors. But one man stood out. He wasn't trained in law. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't even in the country. He was just a brother. And he refused to be silent. If Onkar hadn't made that first call, if he hadn't flown across the world, if he hadn't pressed the police, Anil's murder may have been written off as a disappearance. It was his love that pulled the first thread. The note in the sock wasn't just a clue. It was a final act of courage. Anil knew what was happening. He knew he wouldn't make it out, but he didn't beg. He didn't scream. He hid a letter, a sliver of paper, a piece of evidence soaked in seawater, but stronger than any lie. It didn't save him, but it made sure his killer didn't walk free. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion, like a verdict whispered through tears, like closure arriving too late. But it matters. Regan will never walk free. Hornsey will never plot again. Reese will live with what he saw and didn't stop. It doesn't undo what was lost. But it says to the world, you cannot murder a family and erase their name. We will remember them. The Chohan family left no survivors, no will, no estate, no voice to speak for them. But they left something else. A case that changed how the UK treats disappearances, a warning about trust, and a story that, no matter how dark, deserved to be told. They aren't just names on a file. They were a mother, a father, a grandmother, 2 baby boys, and they mattered. Maybe you're watching this because you love true crime. Maybe you're watching because you're afraid of being forgotten. Whatever brought you here, remember this. Justice doesn't come in a straight line. It comes in whispers, in footnotes, in hidden socks, in brave brothers, in questions that never stop being asked. This is not just a case. It is a caution, it is a cry, and it is a promise. A family vanished, but their story did not. Kenneth Regan never needed a weapon to begin with. His sharpest tool was trust. In every corner of the Chohan case, one pattern stands out. He didn't just kill people, he used them first. He offered jobs, made promises, spoke with charm. And by the time anyone saw the truth, it was too late. Anil Chohan wasn't naive. He was kind. He'd once gone to prison for tax evasion and rebuilt his life from the ground up. So, when a man like Regan came knocking, fresh out of jail, saying he just needed a second chance, Anil said yes. He believed in redemption, a former colleague said, but Regan didn't want a second chance. He wanted a clean slate, and he didn't care who he erased to get it. Belinda Bruin was a single mother in financial trouble. She wasn't looking for drama, just survival. Regan knew that. He offered her a high-paying job as managing director at Seba Freight, a salary she couldn't say no to, work that sounded easy, and he got more than her signature. He got access to her land, her trust, her silence. Even after he dug a trench in her field without asking, he convinced her it was for her benefit. Regan didn't need any force. He just needed people to believe he meant well. William Hornsey was an old associate, loyal, quiet, and unremarkable. He didn't kill, but he followed instructions. He helped dig, helped drive, helped deceive. Peter Reese, a man who broke under guilt. Regan used both, knowing they wouldn't question him until it was too late. That's how manipulators work. They don't target the defiant, they target the desperate. And then they strip them of moral weight until helping a killer starts to feel like helping a friend. At the center of this crime was not just a family, it was a company. Seba Freight wasn't a tech empire or a billion-pound operation. It was a small bonded warehouse business. It moved fruit, it hired drivers, it supported an immigrant family. But for Regan, it was perfect. A quiet place to move product, a modest business with import licenses, a cover operation, already built. If the Chohans had been strangers to Regan, they'd still be alive. For weeks after the murders, Regan maintained a chilling calm. He walked the halls of Seba like he owned them. He forged Anil's signature. He introduced Belinda to the staff as the new director. He handed out paperwork claiming Anil had retired abroad. He even attended meetings as if nothing had happened. Nobody suspected a thing. Because when a lie is told confidently enough, it looks like the truth. Psychological profilers called Regan high-functioning narcissistic. That's the clinical term. But in real life, it means he thought he was smarter than everyone. He believed rules didn't apply to him. He saw people as pieces, not persons. Experts later said Regan had a fantasy of elevation. He couldn't just escape prison, he had to rise above it. Not just live, but dominate. Anil Chohan was everything Regan wasn't. Trusted, loved, respected. So Regan did what narcissists do when they envy someone. He destroyed him. For the South Asian immigrant community in West London, the Chohan murders sent a shockwave. Anil's story was theirs. Hardship, rebuilding, building a business with honor and sweat, providing for the next generation. To see that dream ended with violence, it shook something. Afterward, South Asian business owners became more cautious, more skeptical of friendly investors, more guarded. Regan didn't just murder a family, he violated a symbol. The media called it the freight company murders. Some headlines focused on the absurdity of it. A business deal turned deadly, smuggler kills to take over fruit firm. But what many missed, what they couldn't fit in a headline, was the grief. A mother was killed in front of her babies, or worse, after. Two infants who didn't even understand danger were erased without mercy. It wasn't just shocking, it was evil. And no headline could carry that weight. Some crimes end with a sentence. Others never really close. Regan will die in prison. Hornsey too. Reese will carry guilt for what he